Hey, welcome everybody. We are on lesson 5 of our walk study, guided by worship. And we're going to just jump right into things today. A couple of years ago, I was with my son Graham at the time. We were at a farmer's market in Kingston where we were working the market as vendors, selling some crafts we'd made, and it was I remember this day really distinctly. It was a really cold and overcast, damp day. The weather was completely iffy. It was just and and we were there, all the other vendors, and we had a canopy, one of those pop-up canopies. And close by us, there were two environmental activists were set up, and but they didn't have any canopies, they didn't have any chairs, they didn't have anything. They just had their little clipboards and stuff, and they were, they had petition for people to sign, and they were, anybody that walked by, they were trying to, to stop them and say, hey, can we talk to you about global warming? And just trying to get people to talk to them and interact and whatnot. And so as the day went on, they're close by us, and we see and hear them and whatnot. But the rain started. And so what we did is, all the other vendors did, is we kind of pulled back onto the canopies, and hunkered down, in what dry we had, and because it was cold and wet and miserable, it was not fun. And I looked over, kind of half expecting to see these guys. They have no canopy. They've got nothing. I expect to see them pack up and go home, but they didn't. They stood there in the rain. I don't even think they had hoods or even proper dress for the weather. But they stood there, their petitions on their clipboards getting soaked. You know, um, Trying to stop anybody that was walking by them, which and nobody's really stopping because it's raining, and so they don't want to stop in the middle of a rain area, and talk to these people, and as I was watching them, they were just not giving up, and I was like, man, these guys are dedicated, and it really struck me because I could see that they valued their cause way more than their comfort. I mean, they believed that this was was of far more importance than them being warm and dry or anything else. And so I think a lot of the people around us were probably surprised by what they were doing, but I wasn't. You know why? Because I could see that they were worshipers. They had found something that they considered big and beautiful to give their lives to, a purpose to live for, a cause to die for, something worthy of their worship. So, no, they weren't going anywhere. And if I had to guess, they had oriented their entire lives around this worship, from the biggest of the life's choices to the smallest, from the cars they drove to the food they ate to the clothes they wore, the recycling. I mean, all those things. How they spent their time and their money and their energy were determined by what they had chosen to worship, namely protecting Mother Earth. And just like them, you are a worshiper. Every day, all day long, everywhere you go, you worship. It's what you do. It's who you are. You know, um, we were created this way, and if for some reason you should choose not to give God that worship, to give to God the worship that He so deserves and He desires, you'll still worship something. You'll exchange the Creator for something He has created. You know, this is true. Because worship is our response to what we value the most in life. And so what God says is, I want you to value me the most. I want you to love me. I want you to see what I've done for you, how much I love you, how much I've sacrificed for you. And and in doing so, we when we understand that, that's the gospel. When we understand that Jesus Christ left heaven, became a man, suffered and died in our place, so that we might live, so that we might have, so much, that we might be adopted, so we might be forgiven. When we realize that, what God says is, I want you to love me with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So when we understand the gospel, our natural response is to worship Jesus, because out of love we see, man, that is so valuable. But oftentimes we don't see the value in Jesus. We don't see, the value in our Creator, and so we worship other things, you because worship is about saying this person, this thing, this experience is what matters most to me. It's the thing that I put first in my life. I mean, think about it. What a sports stadium on any given day, and you'll find worshipers. You know, people people that dress in their team colors, and orient their life around the games, and they know the players and the stats, and they care, and when somebody pulls their hamstring, they're in anguish over this. I mean, this is worship. But we worship a lot of other things too. You can worship a relationship. That boy or that girl becomes everything to you, and you're and every they are the most important thing in the world to you, and the sun rises and sets in their happiness and their displeasure. I mean, and so we worship the relationship. You can worship your family, your parents or your siblings, or when you have children of your own, you can worship them too. They become an object that is the most important thing in your life. You can have a dream, a cause, a hope, whatever it is that becomes a worship thing. Friends, status, stuff. Oh, I know a lot of people that worship their stuff. You know, could be your name or your reputation. It could be a band. A celebrity. I mean, a lot of people worship celebrities. You know, some kind of pleasure. Yourself, even. You can be the object of your own worship. And the real question is, if you examined your life, look at what you value the most, where you put your time and your money, your energy and your thoughts. What would we see? If we really stopped to ask that question, what are you worshiping? What would be the answer? Because like I said, we are all worshipers. We are all worshiping something, whether you want to admit it or not. So the question is what you're worshiping worthy of worship? So whatever name you put on it, the person, the thing, the idea that you've concluded in your heart is worth the most. And I think, and here's the thing: I don't think that most people sit down and think about what they're worshiping. I think they've gravitated towards something, and they think that this is the thing that's going to make them happy. This is the thing that's going to give them security. This is the thing that's going to give them pleasure. This is it. And if I just worship this thing, if I dedicate my life to this thing, that somehow is going to bring them what they want, because whatever is worth the most to you is you guessed it, it's what you're worshiping. And so I don't think it's something you sit down and think about oftentimes, but you're doing it. And so I would just like to ask you guys to think about that, to step back and question and go, what is it that I'm worshiping? Because worship tells us what we value the most. As a result of worship determines our actions. It becomes the driving force in all that we do. So how I spend my time, how I spend my money, how I spend, my energy, where I put my thoughts, what do I think about when I go to sleep at night? What am I thinking about when I wake up in the morning? What I spend my time pursuing, this all tells us what we value most, and it all tells us what we're worshiping. So the question is, what are you worshiping? And is it worthy of your worship? Because worship is the activity of the human soul. So not only do all people worship, but they worship all the time. This is something we do all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. In Hebrew, the same word for worship is the same word for work. I mean, they had this idea that the way you work and the way you conduct yourselves, the way you do, the way you go about your day is an act of worship. And it's true. I mean, right now, all around us, people of all shapes and sizes, people of every age and purpose are worshiping. They're continually making decisions based on what they value most. Worship happens everywhere, every day, all day long. And so it's not something when we say, oh, we're going to worship at church. Okay, yeah, that's part of the worship, when we go and we acknowledge who God is, and we say we value you the most, and we exalt him, and we lift him up, and we say, this is what, Lord, you are incredible, what you've done. Jesus dying for me is just mind-blowing. I can't believe you love me so much that you gave up your own life for me, who didn't deserve it, who was your enemy. So when we sing songs about that and we give praise, but worship is something deeper, because it's what we do as human beings all the time, every day, because we crave something to worship. We are insatiably drawn to worship, and oftentimes it's from idol to idol. Desperately seeking, some kind of champion, something to exalt, something to adore that will make our life better. And how do we know for sure that some things are more important than others, more worthy of our worship? Because we see what we're doing with our time. I mean, we don't really know these things. We think we know what is important. And so we give our lives to these things because we were designed that way. But oftentimes the things we choose aren't worthy. We were designed to be worshipers because we are created by and for God this way. In Colossians 1, chapter 1, verses 15 through 17, it says this: the Son, that's Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and things on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Did you catch that? All things have been created through Jesus and for Jesus. You see, not only have you been created by Jesus, you were created for Jesus. So coming from the womb, straight out of the womb, stamped with God's image on us, we know that there is something we are supposed to attach to fit with, a purpose, something bigger than us. We are born pre-wired to connect with God and to worship. And so we go out in life seeking these things. We want to worship. We're looking for something big and beautiful and purposeful and meaningful and incredible to give our lives to adore, to exalt. And so we do. But most of us never ask the question, is this thing really worthy? And if we think about it, we're all captivated by the question of why, aren't we? Why are we here? Is there a reason for our lives? Is there something we're uniquely destined to do? I mean, it's an age-old question. What's the purpose of life? And the Bible says, Jesus says, that the answer begins and ends with him, with Jesus, with God. He is the reason for our life. He is the thing that's worthy of our worship. Simply put, you and I were made by him and made for him. You and I exist for one purpose alone, to reflect back to God his matchless glory. Our lives were meant to be a mirror that reflects back to God and the world around us all that Jesus is. So the question never was, and never will be, are you a worshiper? Because you are. The question is, what are you worshiping? And there are people everywhere who are made for worship, who have this incredible purpose they were created to fulfill. And this question is, do they know who they were created to worship? Do they know that their lives have incredible purpose? And my question for you is, do you? Do you know those things? Do you know who you're truly worshiping, or do you know what you're truly worshiping? And is it worthy? Because Jesus is standing here and he's telling you, I love you so much that I died for you. I loved you so much that I took your sin on my shoulders and bore the wrath of the Father, so that you could be free and you could be forgiven. Isn't that worthy of our worship? And if it is, have you realized that everything you do all day long, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 a year, that everything you do is an act of worship because it demonstrates what you value the most? Do you value God? Do you value Jesus? Do you value that forgiveness? Do you value the gospel so much that it shows all the time? Or have you elevated something else, some other idol up there? Your own pleasure, your own security, your own your own whatever, your own comfort. A girl or a boy or a job or a dream or whatever it might be. Have you elevated something else up to that level and said, this is the stuff that will make me happy? Instead of saying, God, you're the thing that will make me happy. You're the thing that's worthy of my worship. So just want to leave you with that question this week. And hey, miss you guys. Looking forward to this COVID-19 stuff being done so we can get back together. And in the meantime, hope you're spending time with your mentors, walking through the walkbook, growing in your faith, and being challenged. Because the model of Jesus here is that he worshiped the Father. And I want to walk in Jesus' footsteps. I want to worship the right thing. And I challenge you to do the same. Thank you now. Coughing because I'm dry, not because I have COVID-19.